The first night, I'll never forget, started with a circus of voices, each one louder and more certain than the last. 6 of us had packed into one tent. Just one, mind you. And before we'd even unrolled a single sleeping bag, there were already 15 conflicting instructions flying around like sparks from the fire. "Stake the corners first," someone barked. "No, no, the rainfly goes on before you raise it," shouted another. A third insisted we had to move the tent uphill to avoid flooding, while a fourth argued downhill was safer from the wind. Every suggestion clashed in mid-air, and all the while the poor tent lay there in a crumpled heap, looking more like a deflated parachute than shelter for 6 weary campers. It was supposed to be simple. One tent, one night, one group of friends, laughing their way into a good story. But nothing about it was simple. The ground was rocky, the light was fading, and mosquitoes whined at our ears like they were enjoying the show. I tried to keep calm, pressing a stake into the soil, while the others bickered. But as soon as I got it in, someone else yanked it out, because we should pivot north for airflow. We must have looked like a comedy act from a distance. 6 people spinning in circles, pointing fingers, crouching, standing, grabbing poles, and then putting them back down again. At one point, Mark tripped over the half-raised tent pole and sent the whole thing collapsing on top of him, leaving just his boots sticking out. The rest of us erupted into half-panicked, half-hysterical laughter as we pulled him free, his hair sticking up like a man who'd wrestled lightning. "I'm fine," he muttered, brushing off dirt. But that tent's got it out for me. By then, our patience was running thin, and the sky had turned a dusky purple. The trees were whispering in the evening breeze, the kind that promises a chill once the sun drops. We needed that tent up, but every voice still fought to lead, none willing to follow. I could smell smoke from a neighboring campsite where their fire was already crackling, steady and bright. Their laughter drifted through the trees, easy, confident, like they'd already settled in for the night. Meanwhile, we were still standing over a limp pile of nylon, glaring at each other as if someone else had the secret answer. My stomach grumbled, reminding me we hadn't even started dinner yet. That tent wasn't just shelter anymore. It had become a test, a challenge we weren't passing. And yet I couldn't help but grin at the chaos of it all, because I knew one day, around a fire like this, the story of 6 people, one tent, and 15 conflicting instructions would be worth every stubborn minute. By the time the last streaks of daylight were fading behind the tree line, our tent still looked more like a pile of laundry than a home for 6. That's when tempers started heating, faster than the camp stove we hadn't even lit yet. Jen swore up, and down that the poles had to cross a certain way, holding them like she was demonstrating swordplay, while Pete declared she was holding them upside down. Mark, still sore from being buried under canvas, kept muttering about engineering principles, though none of us could tell what principles he was actually referring to. And then there was Sarah, flipping through the tiny instruction booklet with her headlamp and announcing each step like a referee. Trouble was, nobody actually listened to her. We tried 3 different setups in quick succession, each collapsing more spectacularly than the last. One version looked like a crooked teepee. The next sagged in the middle, like a hammock gone wrong. And the third managed to stand for about 10 seconds before the whole frame gave way, and the rainfly swallowed it like a snake eating its prey. Each time it fell, we groaned louder. But each time we picked it back up again, stubborn as mules. Hunger gnawed at us, but nobody dared admit defeat. The woods around us had grown darker now, and I could hear the night creatures waking up, crickets tuning their strings, owls hooting low and patient, something scurrying through the underbrush just out of sight. Finally, a voice cut through the chaos. It was quiet, tired, but steady. "Guys," said Emma, the only one who hadn't tried to wrestle the tent yet, "maybe if we all stop giving orders and just follow one plan, any plan, we'll actually get this thing standing." You'd think that was obvious, but in the frenzy of too many opinions, it hit us like a revelation. For a beat, we all stared at her, then at each other, the silence broken only by the chirp of frogs down near the creek. Nobody wanted to admit she was right, but our options were wearing thin. "All right," I sighed, brushing dirt off my knees. "Emma, you're in charge. We'll do whatever you say." There were a few grumbles, but no real protest. She flipped back through the instructions, squinted at the pile of poles, and started delegating jobs like a field marshal. One person held the corners, 2 threaded poles, another secured stakes. To my surprise, we stopped tripping over each other and actually moved with some rhythm. The tent began to take shape, rising like a stubborn beast finally tamed. I could feel relief swelling in my chest as the walls stretched taut and the roof curved overhead. By the time we stepped back, the thing was standing tall and proud, sturdy against the cooling night air. It might have leaned a little to one side, and the rainfly looked like it had been thrown on in a rush, because it had. But it was up. We all let out a cheer. The kind of tired, half-delirious cheer that comes only when you've wrestled chaos into submission. Just then, as if on cue, a gust of wind rattled the branches above us, and we froze, holding our breath. The tent wobbled but didn't fall. We'd done it. At long last, we had a home for the night. The moment of triumph didn't last long. As soon as we ducked inside, it became painfully clear that 6 adults in one tent was less victory and more claustrophobic experiment. We shuffled and twisted like pieces in a puzzle that didn't quite fit, trying to find some way for all of us to stretch out. Mark immediately claimed the corner, with the flattest ground, sprawled like a starfish. Pete wedged himself beside him, muttering about proper spacing for ventilation. Jen and Sarah bickered over which side should be designated the door side, while Emma quietly rolled out her sleeping pad in the dead center, leaving the rest of us to work around her. The tent smelled of nylon, dirt, and the faint tang of sweat we'd worked up during our hour-long battle with the poles. Every time someone shifted, the whole structure groaned. My knee jabbed into someone's ribs. Somebody's elbow ended up in my ear. We laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that comes out half exasperated, half desperate. "This is ridiculous," Sarah whispered, her voice muffled as she tried to arrange her sleeping bag without smothering herself against the wall. Who thought 6 people in one tent was a good idea? None of us answered, because we all knew the truth. We thought it would be fun. Then came the gear problem. Backpacks, boots, and jackets had to go somewhere, but with no vestibule and no spare inch, they piled up around the edges like sandbags against a flood. Mark kept tripping over his own boots every time he tried to shift. Jen swore she could feel a rock through her sleeping pad, but nobody had the space to let her scoot away from it. Someone, no one admitted who, let out a sigh that sounded suspiciously like a fart, and the whole tent erupted in groans and laughter again. The sound carried out into the night, startling an owl that hooted indignantly from a nearby tree. Despite the mess, there was something strangely comforting about being pressed shoulder to shoulder, listening to the wind outside while our little nylon bubble held steady. The forest beyond felt vast and restless, but inside we had our own kind of noisy, imperfect warmth. I could hear the fire from the neighboring site crackle down to embers, and in the distance, the faint trickle of the creek played like background music. For all our squabbles, for all the bruised knees and cramped quarters, there was a certain joy in knowing none of us would forget this night. And yet, as I lay there staring at the ceiling, no more than a foot above my face, I couldn't help thinking the real test wasn't setting up the tent. It was surviving the night inside it. Sleep, as it turned out, was not going to be an easy guest that night. Within minutes of settling down, the great symphony of discomfort began. First came the shuffle of sleeping bags, zippers snagging and nylon crinkling with every twitch. Then the chorus of snores, Mark leading the charge like a chainsaw echoing. Through the trees, Pete joining in with a sputtering stop-and-start rhythm that made it sound like the tent itself was choking. Jen, wedged between them, hissed roll over every 5 minutes, only to be drowned out by their oblivious rumbling. The tent, already warm from 6 bodies, crammed into too small a space, grew hotter with every breath. The rainfly meant to shield us from weather trapped the heat inside, turning the tent into a sticky cocoon. I found myself peeling off layers, only to pull them back on moments later when a chill draft slipped through the zipper gap someone had left open. And then came the arguments. "Stop hogging the blanket," Sarah snapped. "That's my corner," Pete muttered in the dark. At one point, Jen accidentally kneed Emma, who groaned, "If I survive this, I'm never camping with you people again." We all chuckled at that, but no one disagreed. Outside, the forest was alive. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their cries weaving through the trees. A branch cracked somewhere nearby, probably just a raccoon, but in the middle of the night it sounded like something far larger, prowling around our campsite. We froze, silent, listening. The tent seemed suddenly paper-thin, the nylon no barrier at all. After a tense minute, the rustle moved on, and Pete whispered, "Probably just squirrels." Nobody believed him, but it was easier to pretend. As the hours dragged, every little discomfort magnified. The air grew damp, heavy with the smell of sweat, wet socks, and whatever dinner crumbs had hitched a ride inside. My back ached from the uneven ground. Someone's foot pressed against my hip. I pressed back, which started another chain reaction of nudges and muffled curses until we all settled into a fragile stillness again. Through it all, the tent stood firm, a miracle, considering how badly we'd put it together. Then, just as I felt my eyelids drooping, the first fat raindrops began to patter against the roof. It was a gentle sound at first, almost soothing, but the patter quickened, turning into a steady drumming. Rain hammered the tent, wind picking up in fits that rattled the poles. Water beaded, then streamed across the fly, and in the dark I felt the faint, cold drip of a leak touch my forehead. I groaned quietly to myself. The battle outside wasn't over. The storm had arrived. By the time the storm hit its stride, it felt as though the sky itself had collapsed on top of us. Rain pounded the tent like 1,000 drummers, and the wind tugged at our handiwork with cruel fingers, testing every stake and seam. The little nylon shell that had seemed so solid earlier now bowed and flexed with every gust. Each of us lay stiff and silent, listening for that telltale snap that would mean the whole thing was coming down. Instead, what we got was worse in its own small way: the leaks. They started as little cold kisses on the forehead, then spread to a steady drip in one corner. Sarah shrieked when her sleeping bag grew damp, scrambling to shift positions, which shoved Jen directly into Mark's ribs. He groaned. Pete muttered about proper water runoff angles, as though that helped. And Emma, who had been the calm commander earlier, simply pulled her jacket over her head and said, "I'm pretending I'm not here." I tried to curl tighter into my own soggy bag, listening as the rain's rhythm drowned out our voices. It was misery, yes, but it was also absurd. Each time lightning lit the tent, we caught glimpses of each other's bedraggled faces, hair plastered, eyes wide, looking like a group of castaways clinging to survival. And then, as if to prove how ridiculous it all was, Mark whispered, "At least the rain's washing out the smell in here." That broke us. We started laughing, wild, breathless laughter that shook the tent harder than the storm itself. Every drip, every gust, every elbow jab suddenly felt like part of a story, too ridiculous not to enjoy in hindsight. Eventually, exhaustion claimed us in fits and starts. Some slept sitting up to avoid the puddles, others balled jackets under them as makeshift rafts. I drifted in and out, waking to the storm's roar, then to silence, then back again. At some point the rain slowed, the thunder rolled away, and a damp stillness settled over the forest. When the first gray light of dawn crept in, we crawled out, like survivors emerging from a wreck. The tent leaned like a wounded soldier, its rainfly sagging, stakes loosened, but it had held. Barely. The campsite was soaked, gear strewn about, and breakfast prospects grim. Yet as we stood there, shivering in the pale morning light, nobody was angry anymore. Instead, we exchanged tired grins, the kind born from enduring chaos together. 6 people, 1 tent, 15 conflicting instructions, and somehow through arguments, elbows, and storms, we'd made it. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't comfortable, but it was unforgettable. Looking back now, I can't remember a single perfect, seamless camping night. The stories worth telling, the ones that keep around the campfire, are the messy ones. The nights where everything went wrong, and we laughed anyway. That morning, as the mist rose off the wet ground and the forest smelled fresh with rain, I realized the truth. The best adventures aren't the smooth ones. They're the ones that make you say, "Remember when?"